I woke up at 7 a.m. like any other workday, groggy and reluctant to leave the warmth of my bed. My alarm buzzed insistently, and I reached for my phone to swipe it off. Instead of heading to the bathroom to check my half-asleep reflection, I lazily opened the camera app. It was easier to assess my face on the screen than to walk all the way to the mirror. As soon as the app opened, I noticed something odd: a video thumbnail in the bottom left corner of the screen. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't recorded anything recently. My last photo had been 3 days ago, and I hadn't even thought to use the camera since. At first, I dismissed it as a glitch. Maybe I had accidentally hit record? But curiosity got the better of me. I tapped the video, expecting to find some meaningless footage. What played was anything but meaningless. The video started with someone quietly entering my bedroom. The intruder moved with unnerving calm, their steps deliberate and silent. My heart pounded as I watched them approach my bed, holding the camera steady as they loomed over me. The angle shifted slightly, and there I was, lying fast asleep, completely oblivious to what was happening. My chest rose and fell with slow, rhythmic breaths. The camera lingered on my face for a moment before the person silently retreated. The video ended. For a few seconds, I just stared at my phone, my hands trembling. I couldn't wrap my head around what I'd just seen. Someone had been in my room. They had stood over me, recording me while I slept, and left without a trace. How hadn't I woken up? I wasn't a heavy sleeper. Even the smallest noises usually stirred me. Yet, in this video, I looked so peaceful, so unaware. Panic gripped me as I leaped out of bed and searched my apartment. I checked every door, every window, every closet, but nothing was out of place. There were no signs of forced entry. My heart sank as I realized the door had been unlocked. I had forgotten to lock it when I came home the night before. My carelessness had invited someone in, but why? Why would someone break into my apartment, not to steal anything, but to record me sleeping? The thought made my stomach churn. I sat down, gripping my phone tightly, and checked the video's details. That's when I noticed something even stranger. The file wasn't recorded on my phone. It had been airdropped to me. My blood ran cold. Whoever had been in my room had left this for me deliberately. They had been close enough to transfer the file directly to my phone. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? Nothing was stolen. There was no forced entry. The only evidence I had was a deeply unsettling video. Would they even take me seriously? It felt hopeless. I texted a few friends, asking if any of them could have pulled off this bizarre prank. Their responses were immediate and full of confusion. None of them would ever do something so invasive. That much I knew. But the reality of that left me with one conclusion. Someone else had done this. A stranger had been in my home, and they weren't afraid to let me know. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I couldn't focus at work, replaying the video in my mind over and over again. The way the intruder moved was deliberate, almost practiced. They didn't hesitate. They knew what they were doing, and they weren't in a rush. That detail terrified me more than anything else. It meant this wasn't a one-off, spur-of-the-moment break-in. This was planned. When I returned home that evening, I locked the door immediately and went through my apartment again. Everything was exactly as I had left it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint sound from the street outside, made me jump. The video felt less like a prank and more like a message. But what were they trying to say? Was it just to scare me? Or was this a warning? A promise of something worse to come? As night fell, I dreaded going to bed. The thought of lying in the same spot where that video was recorded made my skin crawl. But what choice did I have? I locked the door, checked it twice, and crawled under the covers. I told myself I was safe now. I had locked everything. No one could get in. But even as I repeated those words in my head, I couldn't relax. My mind conjured images of the intruder standing over me again, their camera capturing every moment of my vulnerability. What if they were still here? What if they were waiting for me to fall asleep? Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I drifted into a restless sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the first thing I did was check my phone. There were no new videos, no new messages. The apartment was still locked, and everything seemed normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Whoever had been in my room wanted me to know they were there. That much was clear. And the scariest part? They didn't need to steal anything to make me feel violated. They had already taken something far worse, my sense of safety in my own home. Even now, weeks later, I can't fully relax. Every night, I triple-check my locks and scan the room before going to bed. But no matter what I do, I can't escape the feeling that someone's watching. Why do you think they left that video? Was it a warning, a twisted joke, or something more sinister? And if they're still out there, waiting, what will they do next? I still remember the summer of 1999 like it was yesterday, even though it's been more than 2 decades since. Back then, I worked as a camp counselor at a sleepaway camp nestled deep in the Poconos. It was a job I cherished for 3 summers, helping kids, bonding with fellow counselors, and soaking up the sense of freedom that only the wilderness could offer. Every summer was packed with unforgettable memories, but one night that final summer changed everything. It's the reason I never went back. Wednesdays were the best nights at camp. That was when we played Manhunt, a game that became a tradition. It was a more thrilling, nighttime version of hide and seek, where one person was the hunter, tasked with finding and tagging everyone else who would scatter and hide. The woods made it even more exhilarating and, at times, nerve-wracking. I loved the rush of trying to find the perfect hiding spot, listening to the faint crunch of leaves, and feeling my heart race as the hunter got close. That night started like any other. At 8 p.m. sharp, we gathered in the clearing under the camp's tall, swaying trees. The sun had set, leaving the woods bathed in moonlight. Sean, one of the counselors, volunteered to be the hunter. His voice boomed as he announced, "All right, everyone, I'll count to 30. Run fast because I'm coming for all of you." Laughter and excited whispers filled the air as he covered his eyes and began counting. I sprinted toward the woods with the other counselors and campers, weaving between the trees as I searched for a hiding spot. The sound of crunching leaves and snapping twigs surrounded me as everyone scattered in different directions. I found a small, shadowy alcove behind a thick oak tree and crouched low. A few seconds later, I noticed 2 campers, Owen and Griffin, running past me. They were laughing, clearly caught up in the thrill of the game, and didn't stop. They kept running deeper into the forest until they were swallowed by the darkness. I thought nothing of it at the time. It was a game, and everyone was hiding. I figured they'd double back or get caught soon enough. By the time the buzzer sounded at 8:30, signaling the end of the game, I emerged from my hiding spot and made my way back to the clearing. Most of the campers and counselors were already there, talking and laughing about near misses or brilliant hiding spots. Sean was standing in the middle, looking around and counting heads. "Is this everyone?" he asked. I scanned the crowd, but something felt off. My stomach tightened as I realized 2 familiar faces were missing. "Owen and Griffin," I said aloud. "I saw them run deeper into the woods earlier, but they haven't come back." Sean's expression darkened. He immediately instructed the campers to return to their bunkhouses while the counselors stayed behind to search. We combed through the woods, calling their names, shining flashlights into the shadows, and listening for any signs of movement. Half an hour passed, then an hour, but there was no trace of them. Anxiety settled over us like a heavy fog. Eventually, the camp director ordered us to stop. He assured us that the administration would continue the search through the night. Reluctantly, we returned to our bunks, but sleep was impossible. I kept replaying the moment I saw Owen and Griffin running off. I could have stopped them. I should have told them to hide nearby, to stick together. Guilt clawed at me. The next morning, the boys were still missing. The police were called in, and a full search of the area began. They brought in dogs, search teams, and even helicopters, but there were no leads. The woods were dense, sprawling for miles, and it felt like they could swallow anyone whole. As the week went on, the camp tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but the shadow of Owen and Griffin's disappearance loomed over everything. The laughter of the campers was quieter, the counselors' smiles more strained. I couldn't shake the sense of dread that hung over me. By the time the summer session ended, I knew I couldn't come back. The thought of stepping foot in those woods again, knowing those boys were still out there, or worse, was unbearable. Even now, years later, their faces haunt me. I've replayed that night countless times in my head, trying to make sense of what happened. But the truth is, I don't know. Theories swirl in my mind, each one more horrifying than the last. My first theory is that they got lost. The Poconos woods are vast, and if they ran far enough, they could have easily become disoriented, unable to find their way back. Maybe they wandered for hours until exhaustion or the elements overtook them. The second theory is darker, a wild animal attack. The woods are home to bears, coyotes, and other predators. It's possible they stumbled upon something dangerous in the darkness. But the third theory, the one that keeps me up at night, is the most chilling. What if they were taken? The idea of someone lurking in those woods, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, is horrifying. It's the theory that makes my skin crawl every time I think about that night. As of today, Owen and Griffin are still listed as missing persons. Their families never got closure, and neither did I. I can't help but wonder if things could have been different. If I had called out to them, urged them to stay close, would they still be here? What do you think happened to Owen and Griffin? Were they lost to the wilderness, or was something more sinister at play? Share your thoughts. Sometimes, talking about it is the only way to make sense of the unknown. That day in 2004 started like any other. I was in my senior year at Winston Prep, a specialized school near Union Square in New York City. Winston Prep was unique. It grouped students not by grade, but by specific disabilities. I was diagnosed with severe ADHD and OCD, and my classmates dealt with similar challenges like Asperger's or milder forms of autism. It was a place where quirks were the norm, and most of us got along well. But there was one guy who always stood out, Quentin. He wasn't outwardly threatening, just different. He didn't have many friends and had this unnerving habit of staring at people, including me. It wasn't the usual glance. It was the kind of stare that lingered too long, making you wonder what was going on in his head. Still, Quentin never caused me any trouble, so I shrugged it off. Sometimes we even exchanged casual conversation, and he seemed normal enough, at least on the surface. One day in history class, things took a turn. The teacher was leading a discussion about the upcoming 2004 presidential election. Bush was running for re-election against John Kerry, and she went around the room asking who we thought would win. When it was Quentin's turn, he said he hoped Bush would win because he liked his stance on gun laws. That alone didn't seem unusual. Plenty of people had opinions about that. But then Quentin mentioned, almost casually, that he owned a BB gun and planned to bring it to school one day. We all laughed, thinking it was a bad joke. Even the teacher chuckled awkwardly, brushing it off as another one of Quentin's weird comments. But something about the way he said it stuck with me. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it, like it wasn't a joke at all. Over the next few days, I forgot about it. School life went on as usual, classes, tests, and lunchroom banter. Then, one Tuesday morning, everything changed. It was second period when the lockdown siren blared through the school. At first, we thought it was a drill. We'd done plenty of those before, and they were always planned ahead of time. But this felt different. There was no warning, no explanation. Our teacher quickly locked the door and told us to stay quiet, her face betraying a nervousness she tried to hide. Minutes passed. The blinds were down, so we couldn't see what was happening outside. All we had were the sounds, the faint thuds of footsteps, the slam of lockers, and what sounded like shouting in the distance. My heart pounded as I exchanged uneasy glances with my classmates. Nobody knew what was going on, but we all felt it. Something was very, very wrong. Suddenly, the loudspeaker crackled. The principal's voice came on, calm but firm. The lockdown is over. All students are to leave the building immediately. School will end early today for safety reasons. Safety reasons? The words hung in the air like a bad omen. We packed up our things quickly and headed for the exits. Outside, the air buzzed with nervous energy as students whispered and speculated. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. As soon as I was outside, I flipped open my clunky flip phone and turned it on. Within seconds, a message popped up from a friend. "Dude, this is crazy. Quentin just got arrested for bringing a BB gun to school." My stomach dropped. The comment Quentin had made in history class suddenly came rushing back. He wasn't joking. He'd actually done it. I stood there in disbelief, replaying every conversation I'd had with him. What had he planned to do? Was it just a prank gone wrong? Or was there something more sinister behind his actions? The idea that someone I'd spoken to, someone I'd shared classes with, could have brought a weapon to school was chilling. In the days that followed, the school tried to return to normal, but the atmosphere had shifted. Teachers avoided talking about the incident, and students whispered in hushed tones. Quentin never came back. I heard rumors that he'd been expelled and that the police were involved, but no one seemed to know the full story. That was the last time I saw him. I never found out what became of him, but I often wondered about the path he took after that day. Did he get help? Did he turn his life around? Or did he spiral further down a dark road? I'll never know. Now, years later, I'm a middle school English teacher, working with students who remind me a lot of myself back then. I try to be patient, to see past their quirks and frustrations, but Quentin's story always lingers in the back of my mind. It taught me to pay attention to the quiet signs, the subtle red flags that might indicate someone needs help, or that something dangerous is brewing. Looking back, I can't help but wonder, could I have done something differently? Could any of us? Or was Quentin always on a path we couldn't change? These questions still haunt me, and maybe they always will. What do you think? Was Quentin a misunderstood kid who needed guidance, or was he hiding something darker all along? I'm 22 now, standing at the brink of my last year of college. Making friends has never come easily to me. While others seem to navigate social connections effortlessly, I've always been on the outside looking in. Loneliness is something I've grown used to, and when it gets unbearable, I turn to technology for distraction. One of my favorite pastimes was scrolling through OMI.tv, a site where you can chat with random strangers. Most conversations were mundane, people skipping past without a word or exchanges that ended before they even started. Occasionally, there'd be someone interesting, but more often than not, it was just a way to pass the time. That was until last week when I had an encounter that made me swear off the site forever. It was late, well past midnight. The kind of late where silence wraps around you, and every creak in the house feels amplified. I logged on to OMI.tv out of boredom, half expecting the usual cycle of disinterested faces. I scrolled through the random connections, and for the most part, it was the same as always. People skipped me, some laughed awkwardly, and others stared blankly at the camera. Then I connected with a screen that made my blood run cold. Two boys appeared. The older one looked to be around 15 or 16, with sharp, calculating eyes that held a quiet menace. The younger boy couldn't have been older than 10. As soon as the screen loaded, I felt an immediate wave of unease. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The older boy was holding a knife. He wasn't trying to hide it either. The blade gleamed in the dim light of wherever they were. He held it close to the younger boy, who sat silently, his small frame visibly tense. "Hi," the younger boy said softly, his voice trembling. The simplicity of that word hit me like a punch. How could such an ordinary greeting feel so wrong? I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the older boy cut in. "Don't leave." His tone was sharp, commanding. Every instinct screamed at me to disconnect. My heart pounded as adrenaline flooded my system, but I couldn't move. The younger boy's wide, frightened eyes seemed to plead with me. If I left, who knew what would happen? My mind raced through 100 horrific possibilities, each more unbearable than the last. I forced myself to stay. Trying to sound calm, I said, "Hi," though my voice betrayed me, shaking with every syllable. The younger boy didn't respond with a name or any usual introduction. Instead, he told me his birthday. "June 7th, he said quietly, as if clinging to a normal detail to escape the horror of the moment. It was bizarre, but I nodded, trying to keep him talking. Then the older boy's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Okay, now go," he said, his tone chillingly casual. The younger boy froze, his hands trembling. At first, I didn't understand what the older boy meant, but then the boy started moving in a way that made my stomach drop. "No," I whispered, horror dawning on me. The older boy barked, "Keep going." My hand flew to the mouse. I had to disconnect, I had to, but the cursor wouldn't move. My computer had frozen. I frantically tried pressing keys, clicking anywhere on the screen, but nothing worked. I reached for the power button, holding it down with trembling hands. Nothing. Panic set in. I was trapped, forced to watch this nightmare unfold. My desktop didn't have a lid I could slam shut, and the power cord was behind my desk, buried among tangled wires and heavy furniture. My body felt frozen, like my computer, helpless in the face of what I was witnessing. And then, mercifully, the screen went black. The silence in my room was deafening as my computer powered down on its own. My breath came in shallow gasps, and my heart felt like it was going to explode. Relief washed over me for a brief moment, but only a moment. What had I just witnessed? I sat there in the dark, replaying the scene in my mind, trying to make sense of it. Reporting the incident crossed my mind, but what would I even say? I didn't know who they were, where they were, or what their situation was. All I had was a face, a knife, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Since that night, I haven't been able to stop thinking about them. The younger boy's fearful eyes haunt me. I wonder if he's okay or if he ever will be. And the older boy, what was his motive? Was this a sick game to him, or something far darker? I haven't gone back to OMI.TV, and I never will. Whatever comfort I once found in the anonymous chaos of random connections has been replaced by something else entirely, a fear that people aren't always what they seem, that sometimes, behind the screen, lies something far more terrifying than we're prepared to face. And now, I can't help but wonder, if I'd been able to disconnect, would I have been any less haunted? Or is it worse to know I stayed and still couldn't help? What do you think? Would you have stayed? Or would you have left, knowing what was at stake? I never thought moving to New York City would leave me feeling more exposed than ever before. In 2019, at the age of 18, I left my small hometown to chase my dream of studying in the city that never sleeps. I had always envisioned myself thriving in the fast-paced energy, surrounded by endless opportunities and the bright lights of Manhattan. My first apartment, a tiny third-floor walk-up in an aging building, wasn't much to look at, but it symbolized independence. For the first time, I had my own space, and despite its creaky floors and drafty windows, it felt like a step toward adulthood. The first few months were uneventful. My days were consumed with classes and my nights with Netflix marathons or quiet study sessions by the window. The neighborhood wasn't flashy, but it had its charm. Families, students like me, and older residents who always greeted me with a nod. The occasional wail of a siren or the hum of passing cars was background noise I grew used to. I felt safe, or at least I thought I did. One night in late October, after an exhausting day of lectures and group projects, I sat at my desk near the window, finishing an essay. It was around 11 p.m., the kind of hour when the city starts to feel a little quieter, but never completely silent. My apartment window overlooked an alley that separated my building from another set of apartments. Usually, the alley was empty except for a few trash bins and the occasional stray cat. That night, though, something caught my eye. At first, I dismissed it as a shadow or maybe my own reflection in the glass. But when I looked again, my heart skipped a beat. A figure stood in the alley, motionless, staring up at my window. I couldn't make out his face. The dim light from a nearby street lamp only outlined his tall frame and the dark hoodie he wore. He blended into the night, but his presence was unmistakable. I froze. My fingers hovered over my laptop keyboard, and for a moment, I felt paralyzed. My rational mind told me he wasn't looking at me specifically. Maybe he was just loitering, lost in thought. But the longer I stared, the less convinced I became. He didn't move. He didn't even glance away. It was as if he knew I was watching him. I told myself to stay calm. Without taking my eyes off him, I reached for the curtain and pulled it closed. Out of sight, out of mind, I thought, but my heart continued to race. I tried to focus on my essay, but my hands trembled, and the words on the screen blurred together. After a while, I turned off the lights and crawled into bed, hoping sleep would come quickly. It didn't. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I wasn't sure why I had woken up, but the memory of the figure in the alley immediately came rushing back. My stomach twisted with unease. Was he still out there? Curiosity gnawed at me until I remembered the small security camera I had installed in my bedroom a few weeks earlier. My parents had convinced me to get it, citing safety concerns for a young woman living alone in the city. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and opened the app that connected to the camera. The footage was a live feed of my room, but I scrolled back to review the recording from earlier. My heart pounded as I fast-forwarded through the footage, watching myself toss and turn in bed. Then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., the door to my apartment creaked open. I froze. My mind screamed at me to look away, but I couldn't. The video showed a tall man stepping into my room. He was wearing the same dark hoodie I'd seen in the alley. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him move toward my bed. He didn't rush. His movements were slow, deliberate, and eerily calm. For what felt like an eternity, he stood at the foot of my bed, staring down at me while I slept. I saw my sleeping form shift slightly, unaware of the danger just feet away. The man tilted his head as if studying me, then leaned closer, his shadow stretching across my bed. My chest tightened as I imagined waking up to find him standing there. After several agonizing minutes, the man finally stepped back. Without touching anything, without making a sound, he turned and walked out, quietly closing the door behind him. The video ended. My hands shook as I replayed it, unable to believe what I had just witnessed. Someone had been in my apartment, my sanctuary, while I was vulnerable, asleep, and completely unaware. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with questions. How had he gotten in? Why didn't I wake up? And most terrifying of all, what did he want? I called the police first thing in the morning. An officer came to my apartment, reviewed the footage, and filed a report. The lock on my door showed no signs of forced entry, which meant I had either forgotten to lock it or he had found another way in. The officer assured me they would investigate, but as weeks passed with no updates, it became clear that the man had vanished without a trace. I changed the locks on my door, added a chain lock, and even bought a small alarm system. But none of it brought me peace of mind. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the streetlights outside my window, sent my heart racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that he might come back. To this day, I don't know who he was or why he targeted me. Was he a thief who changed his mind? A stalker? Or someone far more dangerous? The lack of answers haunts me as much as the memory of that night. I still live in New York, but I've never felt truly safe since then. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see his shadow standing at the foot of my bed, watching, waiting. And sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I can't help but check the camera, just in case. What do you think his intentions were? Was he testing boundaries, or did something prevent him from going further? And more importantly, would you have reported it or moved out immediately?